It was one of those days when the sky seemed to brood with the weight of unspoken secrets, the rain falling in a relentless, rhythmic patter against the windows of the quaint antique shop. Ethan, a musician plagued by a seemingly endless creative block, sought refuge from the downpour inside. The shop, nestled inconspicuously between two modern boutiques, exuded an air of forgotten times, its shelves and corners crammed with relics and oddities from eras long past. Ethan wandered the narrow aisles, his fingers lightly grazing the dusty surfaces of old books, tarnished brass instruments, and faded photographs. The scent of aged paper and worn leather filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of polish and must. He had always found solace in the past, in objects that carried stories within them, but today he felt a deeper pull, a sense that he was meant to find something here. As he turned a corner, his eyes fell upon a small, intricately carved wooden box tucked away on a cluttered shelf. It seemed out of place among the more mundane items, its dark wood gleaming with a peculiar luster despite the dust that covered it. Ethan was immediately drawn to it, captivated by the delicate, swirling patterns etched into its surface, which resembled musical notes dancing in an eternal, silent symphony. He carefully lifted the box from the shelf, noting its surprising weight and the craftsmanship that had gone into its creation. There was a small keyhole on one side, and beneath the dust, the faint outline of a key still embedded within. With a mix of curiosity and reverence, Ethan wound the key and slowly opened the lid. As the lid creaked open, a haunting, ethereal melody began to play, filling the shop with a sound that was both beautiful and unsettling. The music seemed to resonate deep within Ethan, stirring emotions he couldn't quite name. Each note was clear and haunting, like the echo of a distant, forgotten past. He stood transfixed, the world around him fading as the melody enveloped him. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a kind yet weathered face, approached him, drawn by the sound. "Ah, you've found something special there," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of nostalgia. "That music box has been in this shop for as long as I can remember. It's said to have belonged to a composer who went mad, driven by the melodies within." Ethan glanced up, meeting the shopkeeper's eyes. "It's haunting," he murmured, feeling an inexplicable connection to the music. "How much for it?" The shopkeeper smiled a knowing smile. "It's yours for a fair price. But be careful, young man. Some say the music has a way of taking hold of you." Ethan nodded, barely hearing the warning as he handed over the money. He wrapped the box carefully and tucked it under his arm, the melody still echoing in his mind as he left the shop and stepped back into the rain-soaked street. Back in his small apartment, Ethan placed the music box on his cluttered desk, surrounded by sheet music, instruments, and recording equipment. He wound it up again, the haunting melody filling the room, and sat down at his piano, letting the notes guide his fingers. Hours turned into days as Ethan became increasingly absorbed in his work. The ghostly tune from the music box lingered in his mind, influencing every note he played. His compositions took on a darker, more complex tone, each piece more intense and haunting than the last. The music seemed to pour out of him effortlessly, as if the box had unlocked something deep within his soul. Friends and family began to notice the change in him. Ethan became more withdrawn, his eyes hollow and haunted, his once vibrant personality subdued by an intense focus on his music. He rarely left his apartment, surviving on scraps of food and minimal sleep, consumed by the need to create. Despite the growing concern of those around him, Ethan couldn't stop. The music box's influence over him was too strong. The haunting melodies played on a loop in his mind, urging him to continue, to push further into the darkness. He felt as though the box held a dark secret, a truth that he was destined to uncover through his music. And so, with each passing day, Ethan's obsession grew, the line between inspiration and madness becoming increasingly blurred. The music box, with its ghostly melodies, had become both his muse and his tormentor, guiding him down a path from which there might be no return. Weeks turned into months, and Ethan's obsession with the music box deepened. His once cozy apartment, filled with the warmth of creativity and life, became a den of shadows and madness. Sheets of music were strewn across the floor, marked by frantic, almost manic scribbles. Instruments lay in various states of disarray, some broken from fits of frustrated inspiration. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, ink, and an unshakable sense of unease. Ethan's appearance deteriorated along with his surroundings. He rarely bothered to change his clothes, and his hair grew wild and unkempt. Dark circles framed his eyes, which had taken on a hollow, almost haunted look. He was consumed by the music, by the ghostly melodies that poured from the box and into his mind. The outside world faded into insignificance as he delved deeper into his compositions, each one more intense and darker than the last. Despite the chaos, Ethan's work began to attract attention. Local musicians, producers, and even some critics were captivated by the raw emotion and eerie beauty of his new pieces. His music was unlike anything they had ever heard, complex, haunting, and disturbingly beautiful. There was a darkness to it that seemed to resonate on a deep, almost primal level, drawing listeners in and leaving them profoundly affected. Ethan's first public performance of his new compositions was at a small, dimly lit venue in the heart of the city. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation as people filled the room, eager to experience the music that had been creating such a buzz. Ethan, pale and gaunt, took to the stage with his piano, the music box placed prominently beside him. As he began to play, the haunting melodies from the box seemed to weave themselves into his music, guiding his fingers across the keys with a life of their own. The audience sat in stunned silence, captivated by the beauty and darkness of the music. Each note seemed to pull them deeper into a shared trance, binding them together in a collective experience of awe and unease. But as the performance continued, a palpable sense of dread began to creep through the room. The music's intensity grew, becoming almost oppressive. Some members of the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others found themselves unable to tear their eyes away from Ethan, their minds caught in the grip of the melodies. Strange occurrences began to plague the venue. Instruments that had been in perfect tune before the performance now sounded discordant and eerie. The lighting flickered unpredictably, casting bizarre, shifting shadows across the room. A few people reported feeling an inexplicable chill, as if an unseen presence were brushing against them. After the performance, Ethan was swarmed by admirers and curious onlookers, all eager to express their amazement and ask about his inspiration. He answered their questions in a distracted manner, his mind already drifting back to the music box and the compositions it urged him to create. Despite the praise, a growing number of people whispered about the strange atmosphere of the concert and the unsettling power of Ethan's music. As Ethan's reputation grew, so did the unsettling effects of his work. Those who attended his concerts or listened to his recordings began to experience strange phenomena. Nightmares plagued their sleep, filled with dark, twisted versions of Ethan's melodies. Some reported hearing the music even when they were awake, echoing in their minds like a haunting refrain. There were even rumors of people driven to the brink of madness, their minds unraveling under the relentless influence of the music. Ethan's friends and family, increasingly alarmed by his transformation, tried to intervene. They urged him to take a break, to step away from the music box and the dark path it was leading him down. But Ethan was beyond their reach. The music had taken hold of him, its grip too strong to break. He pushed them away, retreating further into his obsession. Despite the growing chaos around him, Ethan's drive to compose only intensified. The music box's melodies haunted his every waking moment, whispering dark secrets and urging him to delve deeper into the abyss. He felt as though he was on the brink of a great revelation, a profound truth hidden within the ghostly tunes. The line between reality and madness blurred as he chased the elusive mystery, unaware of the toll it was taking on his mind and soul. And so, Ethan continued, driven by a compulsion he could neither understand nor resist. The music box, with its haunting melodies and dark influence, had become both his greatest muse and his most relentless tormentor, leading him ever closer to the edge of sanity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows lengthened, Ethan sat in his dimly lit apartment, the music box's eerie melody playing softly in the background. The room was a mess of scattered sheet music and broken instruments, the physical manifestations of his descent into obsession. His eyes, bloodshot and weary, fixated on the flickering candlelight, the flame dancing in tune with the haunting notes. Desperation gnawed at Ethan's soul. He knew he was teetering on the edge of sanity, but he couldn't stop. The music box's influence was too strong, its ghostly tunes weaving through his mind like a dark, seductive spell. He felt that if he could just understand the source of the melodies, he might unlock some profound truth, something that could explain his all-consuming need to create. Determined to uncover the origin of the cursed music box, Ethan turned to research. He scoured libraries, searched online forums, and even consulted with historians and occultists. He found obscure references to a composer from the 18th century, Alaric Voss, who had created the box during a period of intense personal torment. Voss had been a genius, his work celebrated across Europe, but he was also plagued by madness. According to legend, he had poured his suffering, his darkest thoughts, into the music box, infusing it with a part of his soul. Ethan discovered that Voss had intended the music box as a conduit, a means to channel his tortured creativity into a physical form. But something had gone horribly wrong. Instead of merely capturing his genius, the box had absorbed his madness, turning it into a malevolent entity that fed on chaos and despair. Over the centuries, the box had passed through many hands, leaving a trail of destruction and insanity in its wake. The deeper Ethan delved, the more he realized the true nature of the music box. It was not just an artifact, it was alive, a dark intelligence that thrived on the turmoil it created. It chose its victims carefully, sensing their vulnerabilities and exploiting their deepest fears and desires. The melodies were its voice, a haunting siren call that ensnared the minds of those who listened, driving them to the brink of madness. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Ethan's horror grew. He understood now that the box had chosen him, sensing his desperation and artistic ambition. It had manipulated him from the start, using his talent to create music that spread its dark influence. The concerts, the recordings, the growing chaos, they were all part of the box's plan, a means to extend its reach and amplify its power. Ethan knew he had to break free from the music box's grip, but he was already deeply entangled in its web. The melodies haunted his every waking moment, whispering dark secrets and urging him to continue. He felt an almost physical pull toward the box, as if it were a part of him, and the thought of destroying it filled him with both dread and sorrow. Desperate for a solution, Ethan sought out a reclusive occultist known for her expertise in dealing with cursed objects. Madame Verlaine, an enigmatic figure with a reputation for delving into the supernatural, agreed to meet with him after hearing his tale. Her home, filled with strange artifacts and the smell of burning incense, had an air of ancient wisdom and hidden knowledge. Madame Verlaine listened intently as Ethan recounted his experiences, her eyes narrowing with concern. "The box is a vessel," she said, her voice low and measured. "It contains a fragment of the composer's soul, twisted by his madness. To break its hold, you must confront the entity within, severing its connection to our world. But be warned, such rituals are perilous. The box will not relinquish its power easily." Ethan felt a mixture of hope and fear. He knew the ritual was his only chance to escape the music box's influence, but the thought of facing the entity within filled him with dread. Nevertheless, he agreed to proceed, willing to risk everything to reclaim his sanity and free himself from the dark melodies that had taken over his life. With Madame Verlaine's guidance, Ethan prepared for the ritual. He gathered the necessary items, a silver dagger, black candles, and rare herbs, each one imbued with protective properties. The ritual would take place at midnight, the hour when the veil between worlds was thinnest, and the entity within the box most vulnerable. As the appointed time approached, Ethan felt a growing sense of foreboding. He knew that the music box would fight back, using every trick at its disposal to maintain its hold on him. The air grew heavy with tension, and the ghostly melodies seemed to intensify, filling the apartment with an almost tangible sense of malevolence. At midnight, Ethan stood in the center of his apartment, surrounded by the symbols and items required for the ritual. He wound the music box one last time, the haunting melody filling the room, and began to chant the incantations Madame Verlaine had taught him. The air crackled with energy, and the shadows seemed to come alive, swirling around him as the box's lid creaked open. The haunting melody emanating from the music box reached a fever pitch, intertwining with Ethan's chants. The air around him vibrated with an almost palpable energy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Shadows twisted and danced along the walls, growing darker and more malevolent with each passing second. Ethan felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead, his hands trembling as he clutched the silver dagger. As the final incantation left his lips, the music box emitted a piercing shriek, its ghostly tune warping into a cacophony of dissonant notes. The lid snapped fully open, and a dark, swirling mist began to pour out, coalescing into a vaguely human shape. The entity within the box had been summoned, and its presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread and despair. Ethan stood his ground, though every instinct screamed at him to run. He could feel the entity's malevolent gaze upon him, its hatred and hunger for chaos palpable. The shadows around him seemed to press closer, as if drawn to the dark power emanating from the entity. Ethan tightened his grip on the dagger, knowing that this was his only chance to break free. "Why have you summoned me, mortal?" The entity's voice echoed, a chorus of whispers and screams. "Do you seek to understand the music, or have you come to destroy it?" Ethan's voice wavered but remained steady. "I seek to end this curse, to free myself and others from your grasp." The entity's laughter filled the room, a sound devoid of any warmth or humanity. "You believe you can defeat me? I have existed for centuries, feeding on the despair and madness of countless souls. You are nothing but a pawn in my symphony of chaos." Summoning all his courage, Ethan began the final part of the ritual, plunging the silver dagger into the heart of the music box. The box shuddered violently, and the entity let out a howl of rage and pain. The shadows around him writhed and twisted, as if trying to protect their master. But Ethan did not waver, chanting the incantations with renewed fervor. The room erupted into chaos. Objects flew off the shelves, instruments shattered, and the very air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. Ethan felt an immense pressure building within the room, as if the entity's fury would tear it apart. But he continued the ritual, determined to see it through to the end. With a final desperate incantation, Ethan drove the dagger deeper into the music box. The entity screamed, a sound that seemed to pierce through reality itself. The dark mist began to dissipate, drawn back into the box, which now glowed with an unearthly light. The shadows recoiled, retreating into the corners of the room. For a moment, everything was still. Ethan stood in the center of the chaos, his breath ragged and his body trembling. The music box lay silent and still, the entity seemingly vanquished. He allowed himself a moment of relief, believing he had finally broken free from its curse. But as he reached out to touch the box, a sharp, icy pain shot through his hand. He recoiled, staring in horror as his skin began to turn translucent, his fingers fading before his eyes. The room around him shifted and blurred, the once familiar surroundings now taking on a ghostly, ethereal quality. Ethan stumbled backward, his mind reeling with confusion and fear. He realized with growing dread that the entity had not been destroyed, but had instead drawn him into its own realm. He was no longer part of the living world, but trapped in a twisted mirror dimension where the entity held dominion. The music box's melody began to play once more, softer now, but still carrying that same haunting beauty. Ethan could see the real world through a foggy veil, the faces of his friends and family distorted and distant. He tried to call out to them, but his voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the spirit world. As the full weight of his situation settled upon him, Ethan understood the cruel irony of his fate. He had sought to free himself from the music box's curse, only to become a part of the very darkness he had tried to escape. The entity's laughter echoed around him, a reminder of his failure and the eternal torment that awaited him. In the real world, the music box lay dormant, its once bright melodies now silent. Those who listened to Ethan's final compositions felt a lingering sadness, a sense of something unfinished. They would never know the true cost of the music or the fate of the musician who had poured his soul into his work. Ethan, now a shadow among shadows, wandered the mirror dimension, his mind forever haunted by the melodies that had once inspired him. The entity watched over him, its hunger sated for the moment, but always ready to ensnare another victim. And so the cursed music box remained, a silent sentinel of madness and despair, waiting for the next soul to fall under its spell.